Thanks, Melissa. It is my pleasure to introduce Larry Thompson. Larry is a popular speaker at state and national conferences, as well as a thought leader and author in the fields of education and leadership training, as the creator of Responsibility Centered Discipline, or RCD, Responsibility Centered Leadership, or RCL, and Responsibility Centered Parenting, RCP. He has worked with thousands of educators, leaders, and parents throughout the country and outside of the United States. In 2011, he was the State Principal of the Year. And his brand new book, Responsibility Centered Discipline, Keeping Students on the Path of Accountability, leverages proven success to challenge us to reimagine school discipline with research-based actions to build skills such as responsibility, perseverance, empathy, and self-regulation in every learner from pre-K through high school. It published just a few days ago, and it's already at number 4 in Amazon's bestsellers in education administration. And we are so delighted to have him. So over to you, Larry.
Oh, thank you. And Corwin has been a joy to work with. So it's been awesome to get started and to get the word to more people. So I'm going to give you just a real quick background because my work was always done in schools. I started as a classroom teacher, then began to do well with kids that struggled, and they began to say, maybe you should teach special ed. So I took on that endeavor and got my licensure to teach special education. And I ended up with my own self-contained classroom of kids that had a lot of behavior struggles and found ways to be successful with them. And then they convinced me to take over an alternative school, third graders through 12th graders that were facing expulsions. And really was a failing system in that setting. Kids were continually being kicked out. Kids were not achieving any of the benchmarks academically. And with that, they'd been through 5 principals in one school year. So I was number 6 to a lot of people. So I can speak in depth about how tough it is to reform schools. And so I speak a lot through this book to our school leadership about the challenges of building new systems so our teachers can be successful and our kids can be successful. And so the success that I had in those places kind of began to have me sought after to do some training and help some other schools. So that school that had all the violence went on to be recognized by the governor as one of the top schools of technology. I've seen juvenile corrections, young men incarcerated, 13 to 19-year-olds. By changing to these approaches, we've seen the graduation rise 53% in one of the facilities in 18 months. We've seen schools hit marks they've never hit academically, because so often we forget that we're looking at all this academic data for our state assessments and those types of things, but the things that are holding us back is often the student's behavior, because choosing not to work is a behavior, choosing not to engage. And so I'm going to look at it through that lens with you today and kind of walk you through some of the things that we encourage schools to look at differently. I do spend most of my days in schools. I have trainers and people that work for us as well, but we spend most of our time retraining the teachers and the staff for these different ways to come at shaping and molding our students to reach their potential. So let me just dive right in and show you kind of one of our starting pieces. In the book, I get to share this in depth, but I talk about we have a Bermuda Triangle around school discipline in most of our schools. And so I often ask, what is the Bermuda Triangle and what have you heard about it? And it's confusing. People say, well, it could be this that causes it, or maybe it's magnetic fields, or maybe it's the wind, or maybe it's currents, and things disappear and nobody knows where they go. And I say, well, after you write all those down, let's talk about how similar that sounds to our schools around school discipline. But the point isn't Bermuda and Florida. The points are different. They're the student, the teacher, and the administrator. So I just want you to look at it this way for a moment in your own building. We have a behavior that begins between a teacher and a student. So it would be this one arrow you see between teacher, student. And the challenge that we have in our schools is the administrator or anybody that's going to work with the child if they were to leave class for behavior they can't see what's going on between that teacher and student. So what naturally occurs is there starts to be doubt if it was done the right way. And whenever we can't see how something's done, we do tend to question it. So what we accidentally built in a lot of our schools, because administrators or behavior interventionists or different titles we call this person that would be this red triangle, they can't see what went on between that teacher and student. And because they can't see it, it often gets questioned. So it may sound like this if you're just listening to principals talk. Well, that teacher sends everybody down here. She thinks it's my job to work with them, not hers. We've heard things like this. Well, I bet I know what class this kid came out of. All of those are questioning the process that went on because it's not known. The process isn't known between the teacher and student. So let's flip it over and let's say the teacher's part's over and the student leaves the classroom. And now the person that's supposed to work with the child is the administrator. Well, here comes the teacher's side of this. Teachers can't see what you're doing with that kid down there in that office. And when they don't know what it is and they haven't seen it, they're going to start to question this. And if you've been in schools very long, you've heard this questioning. They're saying things like this. Oh, that kid likes to go to the office. They play games down there. We even have strange disappearances that resemble the Bermuda Triangle. We hear this. I don't know where that kid is. I sent him out yesterday. Nobody's given me an update of what's going on. And then a lot of you will get a laugh out of this, but you've heard teachers say this. I don't know what they did with that kid, but she walked back in my room with a piece of candy in her mouth. And that teacher's wondering, did they give them candy for misbehaving in my room? So now we've got teachers not trusting the process in the office. We've got administrators not trusting the process before the kid came to the office. And pretty soon that last line across the bottom has the tensions between our leadership and our teachers in conflict with each other. And I was a building principal for 17 years. I will just tell you this, our jobs are too difficult for us to be at odds with each other around the student behavior. And so we began to look at what could clean that up, where everybody knows the role they play and everybody learns to do it with great skill. So we call it the pyramid of responsibility. And we put 6 things into a school building that structure that and change all of that. So I'll walk you through some of those today. But the first thing that I really began to learn when I worked with really difficult kids is, and I'll show you why this occurs in the brain in just a moment, but I'll show you first something that we need to do. We know that one of the exits away from growth is if the expectations aren't clear enough. And so the challenge with expectations that I have seen in schools for years is they really are rules. And so we start posting the rules, and some schools go as in-depth of rules for the bathroom, the hallway, the library, the computer lab, the recess, they're everywhere. And one thing that's very hard for us to get schools to do at times, but it's very valuable, is to stop thinking in terms of rules and start thinking in terms of skills. Because the brain will always push back when it's a rule. And I'll show you what's going on in the brain in a moment, but I'll just say it quickly to you now. Autonomy is a part of all of us. I like to be in control of me. The more you try to show me you're going to control me, the more I'm going to show you you don't have control. So think about if a teacher says, you've all seen this occur, teacher says to a kindergartner, hurry up. And they walk even slower. So once that brain's in that little bit of autonomy fight, it pushes pretty hard. Well, we know that in a group of adults, if I had all of you in front of me in a gymnasium or in an auditorium, and I said, my name's Larry Thompson, I have some rules when I speak. Right there, me saying rules would have about 50% of the group lean back in their chair and disengage. Some of them might even walk out. Because when you say rules, it causes that autonomy thing to fire in many people. So the challenge I have is we teach teachers to start school with go over all the rules because we're thinking clear expectation is important, and it is. But you're also going to pit about 50% of the kids into wanting to do the opposite of what you ask. A challenge I say all the time to check where you're at on an autonomy fight is this. What makes the child feel strong in your classroom? Do they feel strong when they meet the goal? or do they feel strong when they don't do it? So when you said hurry up to that kindergartner, they slowed down feeling strong, not doing what you asked. Think about how many times our kids are in that position. You have in-school suspension, and here you're going to hear an autonomy fight. Good. I like in-school suspension. They let me sleep in there. You're not going to go on the field trip. I didn't want to go on the field trip. It's boring and it's hot outside today. You miss recess. Good. I didn't want to get my shoes muddy. Here comes all of the autonomy fight. So the first thing we ask schools to begin to look at is what are the skills needed by our students that are holding them back right now? And can we get those worded and replacing our rules with the skills we're asking people to learn? Because see, when it's a skill and you can't do it, it feels like an issue with you. It's actually what we call the second state of the brain owning it, which is mastery, the feeling of I can do something that takes great skill and I've acquired it. So the challenge, why I show you this slide here, is an activity I do with schools quite often is if you could give a kid just 4 skills for the rest of their life, the big things that you think have the most impact to change their life, what would you give them? So when I do the activity at schools, I put down a piece of paper, and this is in the book, How to Do This. We say, write down all the problem behaviors you have right now. What are all the behaviors you wish would not come back next year that you fought this year? And then you got to look at which school would take that behavior off the list. So if our kids had more perseverance, let's say that's one that a school picks, well, we wouldn't be getting missing assignments. If our kids had more perseverance, they wouldn't copy off their neighbor. They would just dig in and do it. If our kids had more perseverance, they would all be able to graduate. What things are keeping them? If our kids were able to be respectful at all times, well, we wouldn't have bullying anymore. We wouldn't have the mean stuff going around. So you look at what skills do we need to build into our students in order to have our behaviors change. And just to give you a little example of this, I always encourage staff to look at everything as a skill deficit. Because even if a kid says the F word, like, leave me the F alone, I see that as a skill deficit. They don't know how to tell me the right way. So instead of saying you're not going to talk like that and firing up their autonomy, I would say to them this: it seems hard for you to tell me in a respectful way. So try to just take F out so I know exactly what it is you're mad about. Always make it a skill. So if in a school we would replace all these steps and signs, and I've seen schools get so complex that they have boxes and you got to go to the third box and 2 columns over to figure out what the skill is for that area. Believe me, if we have to look it up on the wall, the kids don't have it in here. Simplify it down to 3 to 5 skills that we're all working at. And the second thing to take those young people's brains out of an autonomy fight is these aren't the rules for them. These are the skills for us. This means as a staff, we work hard to model these to kids. It means as a staff, if we fall short, we're able to own it and say, kids, I got a little mad yesterday. It wasn't my most respectful time, and I got to think about how I could do better today. We all decide we're going to work toward these. These take a great amount of work with staff. I can show you a few samples. They're not generic. You can't just, pick the same ones every other town does. You pick the ones that fit your population and your kids, and you use the words that you use in your community. So schools that are bilingual, we would definitely use a combination of words for those. Schools that have a faith component, you would have those woven into the things you're building in your community. So these are important because we're going to need them when we coach tough behaviors and we're in very intense moments. We need a cheat sheet to help our brain. The reason I have teachers put these on the wall in the hallways and places is because when you get to fight, flight, or freeze with the kid, instead of saying out and pointing out the door, you go to the wall and you start coaching from there. And I'll show you how we use this framework to coach the brain. So the next one, and this is probably the most unique thing to responsibility-centered discipline. I spent time in that alternative school as a leader. And when I got there, we were averaging 40 to 50 kids out of class a day for their behavior. Well, we only had 125 kids. So we didn't have the personnel or the space to know what to do with that many kids not in a classroom. And so a lot of that work was done by me with kids. As soon as I could get to one, I would try to process, try to figure out what was going on. And this is where I learned this. I began to look at the patterns that would occur in the students. And over the many years now, we've really seen them as the human condition. But if you look at this book here, The Road to Responsibility, you see the winding, difficult road. And there's exits off of the road. And so I'm going to take you through what the brain is doing when it's exiting growth and won't go to the next space of responsibility. The first exit I'm going to talk about is benefit exit. If you don't see the benefit for changing the behavior, then you feel controlled and you're going to get into an autonomy fight. So benefit exit in a classroom would sound something like this. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to be moving next month. Benefit exit might sound like this. That's not even a bad word. Why do you care? Everybody says it. They're not seeing a benefit to themselves for changing the behavior. Benefit exit with a kid that struggles might be this. Even if I do the work, I still can't pass. Or you could have the opposite side of that. I figured out my grade, and if I don't do this assignment, I still have a B. So the brain's going, how would this benefit me? A real good example how this ties into our own lives is I was training a group of teachers in a city, and principals got to send teachers they perceived had trouble with classroom management. So no teacher really wanted to be there. And so they were pretty difficult for me. And I said, normally I have a couple days to do this training, but I'll try to do it in one. So I'm going to condense some things. And a woman said very loud to the group, oh my goodness, 2 days of listening to this guy. So it got really awkward. I got hundreds of people out there and I'm standing up front, and I said, well, I heard that. And that made it even more awkward. But I said, let me tell you why that doesn't offend me. And I put this slide up. I said, whoever said that right now, your brain is on benefit exit. You are saying, why would I want to go and grow and dig in and get to a better place if I can't see any benefit to this yet? I said, it's my job to try to show benefit today. Maybe one kid could get better in your class. Maybe you don't go home stressed when they struggle as much. Or maybe you go back and tell your principal, this is a systemic change, not just my class. I can't be on my island by myself anymore. But I said, until you find a personal benefit, you're not going to go with us. And so after you build your foundations and you build your core beliefs, one of the things you can do as a staff is really start to talk about the benefits for a kid. How does it benefit the child to be respectful? Because see, so many times we make the benefits about academics and ourselves, and a lot of our kids aren't academically driven. So when a child says to me, I'm never going to use algebra, why do I have to take this stupid class? The conversation shouldn't be algebra. And I've seen teachers try to convince them algebra's in everything. You're going to do it and you won't even know you're doing it. That's not the topic. The topic is, how does it benefit them? And algebra, right then, they don't see. So there's where you would go to your foundation. You know what? I think you'll use algebra. You don't think you will. But here's what I want to tell you. My class doesn't have the goal on my wall of being able to do algebra. It has the goal on the wall of having perseverance and not giving up easily. And today, because it's hard, you're being tempted to give up. My job is to help you on days you need a little wind in your sail or a little nudge to get going. I'm fine sitting and doing a couple problems with you, but I can't let you give up, because we both know your whole life you're going to need perseverance, even if you'd never use math. We teach teachers to get back to the place and close the exit. Child doesn't feel heard if you don't hear the exit they're on. Saying it's required, not going to help. The next one is emotional control. If the adult loses emotional control, the child will exit responsibility. I know I've got some principals listening out there. It's very hard to coach a kid in the office if the teacher was dysregulated and maybe spoke to them in a harsh tone, or maybe even enjoyed kicking them out. So if an adult loses emotional control, we will not be able to get the child to work on themselves. And so one of the things that the framework I'm going to show you, if that's you, and it's a lot of us that can get too emotional at times, I'm going to give you a framework to help with that. What I always say at this point when I do training is, the training begins to differentiate now for which skills are your strengths and your struggles. Some of you have no trouble with emotional control. That is one of your strengths. That would be one of my wife's strengths. Kid could say something and her response is like, what's wrong? Something's got you upset. I have to collect my thoughts real quick because that's not the first thought that comes to my mind if they're swearing at me. So as we begin to do the training with staff, you'll start to see which one is your strength and which one is more challenging to you. And we're going to give you the framework that will help you with all of them. And so the next one is clear expectation. Does the kid know explicitly clear what we're asking? And that's what will help be built by your foundations on your wall. We call those 4 core beliefs, or the 5, however many you pick. We call those the foundations because that's what we're going to build the school up on. And so those are how you always go back to your clear expectation through the foundation. So if a kid says, I didn't think that word was bad, we might say, well, let's have that talk. It's probably not in some settings. And some of your friends don't mind it at all. But because we're in a class, and on my wall, I got our goal to be respectful to all, it wouldn't be a word for class because that word could definitely offend some people in the room. And I'm even one of the some people. We'll always go back to coaching our clear expectations from the foundations. I've seen schools that try to list all the things kids can't do, and all you do then is get the autonomy fight going and trying to find out which one you forgot. Let's coach from the big concepts there on the wall. Okay, the next one would be consistency exit. You're going to hear this one quite often with kids. Somebody else is doing it too. So consistency exit is very common for a student to take. So let me just show you something we do in a demo. I actually have a software where you can practice coaching against animated characters to learn these skills, learn how to close the exits. So I'll show you the first one. That's the animated scene that we created. The first one was about a middle school age kid, maybe young high school student, and they're on their phone. And they're not supposed to have their phone out. And so the teacher comes over and says, hey, Randy, put your phone away. You can't have that out while I'm teaching. And in the scene, lights up, helping the teacher. That's consistency exit. But if a teacher doesn't know that, they tend to say the wrong thing, and they say something like this. He says, well, Tina's got her phone out. Okay, so he's asking, what about Tina? But if you don't have the skill to learn the exit, you're going to answer it wrong, and you'll say something like this: I'm not talking to Tina, I'm talking to you. Well, every time you won't answer his question, he'll ask it another way. So I just kind of show you with my hand of how many times he asked this. And this is really typical that we see in schools. Put your phone away. Well, Tina's got her phone out. Teacher, I'm not talking to Tina, I'm talking to you. So Tina gets to do whatever she wants and I get in trouble? No, but she's not your responsibility. You need to worry about yourself. You just take care of your phone. Okay, so I'm going to get in trouble and she's getting nothing. I'm not going to argue with you. You signed the handbook. You know the phone policy. Well, Tina knows the same policy I had to sign. Listen, if you're going to be disrespectful, you can go to the office. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just saying, what about her? Go. 5 times that brain has let us know it's on consistency exit. Teacher never heard it. You can even send that kid to the office and they're going to say in the office, this is so unfair. Somebody else was on their phone. I got in trouble. You can even send them home. We've seen it hundreds of times. Kid goes all the way home and all they're going to process is their exit, even if you give them a consequence. So what I show people is when someone gets to be heard, it's amazing how they'll come back around. Right then, through the framework I'm going to give you in just a moment, we would be able to coach that brain back because our teachers are trained to hear the exit. So we would have coached it like this. You know what, Randy? I don't want to go look at Tina right now because if I go over there, she's going to think you told on her. That could make it harder for you today. But I believe you. I don't catch all the phones. I know that. But your grade is on the bubble. And hearing this lesson's pretty important because that test is coming up in 3 days. You pass it, you get out of this class. Before I walk away, I want to have an agreement on your phone that feels fair to both of us. And I'm going to give you my word. I will get over there to Tina after a little while so she doesn't think you told, and I'll ask her to hit the standard on phones as well. Okay, what do we got? Almost every kid, when they get to be heard, they'll come back. When you dismiss it and you won't hear them, they get more angry, and we're no different. If you teachers came to your principal and you're upset by something and they dismiss it, you might hold your tongue and not get in trouble, but you walk out frustrated. Like, don't even listen to me. Principals listening today, how many times has a kid been in your office saying, they don't even listen to me? That's almost always the kids on the exit, and they can't communicate it very well, and the teacher doesn't pick up on that. Let's look at the next exit, leading the moment, leadership in the moment. We want to give our teachers the skills to coach these moments, because if we don't give our teachers the skills for these, what tends to happen is they send them to other places to do these hard moments. Go to the office, go to the hallway, go to the back table, go to a neighboring teacher, call for the counselor. We want the first line to be, we have helped the teachers with their skills and they are comfortable stepping in and coaching these moments. We call them challenging moments. And we want to help teachers master the skill of coaching that brain in those extremely difficult, challenging moments. We know that there's times a student needs to leave the classroom. We fully understand that. We just don't want the student leaving the classroom if the coaching wasn't there first, unless it's a safety concern. We have found that the way you get accountability from students is to close these exits, and then you can give the student the problem. Last one is responsibility. And you may have some questions of this one at the end, but I'll do as best I can to explain it quickly. The ability of the kid to respond after things happen. And so one of the things we ask to eliminate in our schools, and we have responsibility center schools throughout the nation in almost every state, but one of the things we ask is don't let time solve the problem for students anymore. We have built systems in our schooling where we allow the clock to do the work instead of the child's brain. And that very seldom causes change. This is why the same kids would tend to be in school suspension over and over and over, because it's not changing their brain. And so we change in-school suspension to a term we call in-school solutions. It is now based on a behavioral change and not a time frame. And so I say in the book, probably my favorite line personally in the book is when I say, the problem that we've done in America's schooling is we hold you accountable for the consequence, but we don't hold you accountable to change the behavior. So kids even say that to us. I did my 3 days, but they never worked on the problem. And then they get in trouble again. And then as a system, they're often in twice as much trouble now because we've already dealt with this. And then eventually kids are kicked out of school. So I can't go into the depth of in-school solutions, but the first thing that we want is the coaching to come from the teacher so these exits are closed. And so now we can give the problem to the student and watch them start to struggle and lift with it. So just to make sense of that, if a kid was on benefit exit, the teacher would have closed that because the framework I'm going to show you does this. So I'm going to show you a framework in a moment that helps you close these exits in the moment so we can put the child in position of growth after that. But in school solutions, in the book, I explain it in depth, and we talk about who should work in there, because it's not going to be timed anymore. It's going to be a student having to work. And it's not just for apologies, it's for the real growth. And I'll show you the difference between an apology and where the brain actually grows and links to a new behavior that it can do, it can replicate. So we consider self-control is very often compared to a muscle. A lot of the experts of human behavior consider it like a muscle. So it gets stronger if it gets flexed, and it gets weaker if it's not being used. So many of our students are not flexing the muscle of self-control, even through the way we do discipline. They get in trouble, they sit in a room, they don't flex the muscle of self-control. So it's weak when they return back, but now they get in trouble again for it, and the consequence gets heavier. And so if you look at this picture, an analogy we use in responsibility-centered schools is spotting. The spotter is the person lifting the weight or helping the person lift the weight. And so in this scene, the person is bench pressing. And if the spotter were to lift too much weight, then the goal would be met, meaning the bar is back up on top of the rack. But the person lifting wouldn't have gotten any stronger because the muscles didn't have to strain. So in responsibility-centered discipline, we call that over-spotting the behavior. And we do have some teachers that tend to lift too much. But instead of saying one's doing it right or wrong, we now can use a common terminology of over or under spotting. The opposite can be true as well. Some teachers get frustrated with behavior and they're not as strong at coaching it. So they almost won't lift anything. They almost just, you're on your own, kid. You shouldn't have said it. So figure it out. Or sometimes I've seen them get so mad they push down on the weight a little bit when the kid is trying to figure it out. So we call that underspotting behavior. So one of the goals programmatically from responsibility centered discipline is to turn us all in the school into the appropriate spotters of behavior. Here's some signs that you're overspotting behavior. When a teacher is done, I'm not doing anything else for that kid. They can just fail. They've probably lifted so much that they feel like they're doing it all. Have you ever got a kid that got their project finished and you go, well, I should get the A on that project. I did most of it. What we want to do is, instead of having factions that are mad at each other and going back and forth, we're going to help them all become the spotter of behavior at the appropriate level. Because what people don't recognize is the over and under spotter both turn out the same product, a kid that doesn't have the strength to do it later. And I say this in kindness. I love teachers. I'm a teacher advocate. I say this often. When you overspot the kid, they can only do it for you usually. These are the kids that they do well when you have them. But as soon as you put them in the next grade or down the hallway to a teacher that's not you, they fail. And so the goal isn't what we can get them to do anymore, because I've had teachers say, oh, I can manage my class. So you got to stop measuring it like that. It's not about what you can do. It's about what they can do. So are you giving them the skill that they can go to a class that they don't enjoy as much, or maybe go to a class with a teacher they don't connect with as well, and still do the skills on the wall? And so this over and under spotting is a really good analogy. And when you have conflict in your building, like you have team meetings and you're discussing a child that's really struggling, this is a great segue into that. What's the spotting look like right now for Michael? Because he's doing well in 2 classes and he's falling apart in all the rest. Where are we at on this as a team? And instead of somebody being harsh and saying, well, say I'm one of his teachers and he's not doing well for me, instead of somebody saying, well, Larry, you just aren't helping Michael at all. You don't get. They could say, Larry, what's the spotting look like in your room for Michael? But I may feel like, Miss Jones, you're doing too much for Michael, though. He tells me that you'll do it for him. So we can talk about it not as right or wrong, but like, let's figure out our spotting. We know if everybody, all of us listening today, if we all took a weights class, the first thing they would do is have to figure out our baseline, what we can lift right now. But they would put us on a program then and we would start lifting. And if we lifted for 2 months and they remeasured us, we would all show a similar percentage in gain, except if we had 2 people that were over or under spotted the whole time, they wouldn't show the same gain. Because see, the under spotter just leaves it on their chest. So what we want to do is systemically build a methodology that we can practice and begin to spot our kids at the right level. So the framework that we use for this, and we call it a give them 5 conversation, because I've learned long ago that you have to make it simple. If we throw really complex things at teachers, they're already overworked and overwhelmed. And it's like, I got to get a PhD to know what to say to these kids. I can't do that. So our framework is rooted in really good brain science, but we've made it really simple. So we call it a give them 5 conversation. And that's the starting part for us to be good at the challenging moment. Down the middle of the hand, you can see some of the tips or the guidelines. And we show schools how you keep it private. Always keep safety in mind. We're not going to keep talking to a student if it's a safety issue that we need help with. But most of our kids that leave a classroom, it's not that kind of a safety issue. It's they're dysregulated. And the last thing, just at the bottom of the wrist, I'd like you to look at is the order of these steps can vary. We don't want a script. In fact, studies have shown us that if something starts to sound scripted, the brain rejects it because it thinks you're trying to trick it and you're not listening to it anymore. And so we don't want this to become a script for teachers, but we want them to learn the process of it. So the first thing we're going to just talk about of the 5 Now, closure will be last, but the others can be in any order. Let me explain them to you. One of the things we're going to do in the child in the moment of tension is they're going to have support. And support is harder than you think. Support is communicating to the child, I'm for you, I'm not against you. Support isn't a flowery compliment like I like your shirt today. Those don't make sense in the moments of tension. So supports have more to do with knowing the kid better, and they get easier the better we know students. But supports are very uniquely still our personality. I've seen teachers say support like this. Man, you're better than this. You know you're my leader at practice. That's saying I see your strengths other places. Support could be this. Not feeling it today. Seems hard for you to get going. And you don't have to tell me what's going on outside of school, but I can tell it's something. Support could be this. I could tell by your eyes. It's been a long morning. Let me help you get through the hour. Support with some of my most angry young kids that just about explode the second you start getting close to them. Sometimes I take something that's kind of hard to see, a water bottle, because it disappears there. But if I had something in my hand that I could hand to them, I'll say, why don't you take this from me? I'm going to let you talk first. You hand it back to me when I know the whole story from your side of it. Just getting to talk first is a support, because a lot of kids don't feel like they're going to be listened to. There's a lot of ways you can show support. Now, I want to be sensitive. The younger children, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, sometimes a little gentle hand on the back is comforting. I highly recommend you don't touch kids when they get older. That would be a trigger of feeling unsafe. But support has to come from the teacher that I'm for you, I'm not against you. All right, how you learn to do that. The next one is our expectation. We don't really say the word expectation because that can just sound like a replacement to rules, but it helps us get to our foundations on our wall that we're going to coach from our foundations. So support might be, I can see you're not feeling it today. Kind of one of those days. Now I might go to my expectation. You know, my class goal, though, is we give the best we got, we persevere. So let's just figure out how we can do that. And now the breakdown is on the middle finger. It did have to go on one of them. So that is the negative behavior. And that's where we have to describe to the student what they did, because some of our kids don't know what they're doing wrong. This is where I would say, if they're not working, I would say, I've given you, 7 or 8 minutes to get started, and it's nothing started yet. If it's language, I could say, I heard the language you said to somebody when you walked in the room. I'm noticing that you're looking across the room pretty mean to somebody, like you're kind of trying to get something started. It's where we identify the problem. I kind of have fun with this in training a lot, but I say, how many times have you walked over to a kid and said, you know why we need to talk, right? And the kid says something like, yeah, because I punched her in the hallway. And you're like, oh boy, no, I didn't know you did that one. If they think it's about a punch and you think it's about a missing assignment, two brains aren't working together yet. It's very important that in the framework of talking, we identify the concerning area. The next one on the ring finger is probably most people's most difficult. How does it benefit them to change the behavior? Because see, until it can find personal benefit for us, we don't want to move forward. And so there's where, if you have the benefits pre-practiced a lot in your mind, you can draw from your thing. You've thought about perseverance benefits. You've thought about respect benefits. And so the last one is closure. And that's, are we at a place where we can both move ahead? It doesn't mean the kid loved the feedback. They're not saying, thank you, this has been so helpful to me. But we can move ahead now. We've got it solved enough for both of us to get back to the learning space and move forward. A give them 5 conversation generally only takes about a minute with a kid that's redirectable. So we start all of our staff off with just learning the easy student. I won't be able to go in the depths of this today, but we break our students into 3 levels of challenge. One that can redirect quickly. They got a lot of self-control. One that's going to need more intensive coaching, and then one that may need to leave the classroom. And you principals out there, I really want you to hear this piece. One of the challenges we have in our schools is we've never calibrated the office referral. And so we don't measure it the same. And when teachers don't measure it the way you do, you're frustrated with them. So through this coaching process and through our practicing together, we can begin to measure it. And so we would all start to say, this now needs more coaching than the classroom at a similar time. I work all across the country, and I have them write down how many kids come, principals, I have them write down how many kids come to the office that you don't think should have been sent to the office. And the numbers generally go between 50% to 70 to 80%. So if there's that much disagreement, then we need to get a calibrated referral. And the give them five coaching conversation is when we take kids through 1, 2s, and 3s, our teachers begin to learn when it's a 3. The next one, the last one, is closure. And that's the idea that we've got it resolved and we can move forward with it, or resolved enough, and it's back to a learning space and environment. So I say this often when I get to work with schools, that the healthy and dysfunctional family, and more of us than not have dysfunctional families. It's only like 20% of families that don't have quite a bit of dysfunction. So I'm not critical of all of our stories and all of our kids and the homes, but what we know in the dysfunctional family, that it tends to solve a problem by waiting it out. So if these are the two players that have conflict, there's a conflict, say could be mom and dad, could be father, daughter, could be anybody, and they separate because they're too upset with each other. And then they just don't talk to each other for 2 or 3 days. And then after enough time goes by, they act like nothing happened. They come back and let's go get pizza. Okay, and everybody goes and gets pizza and acts happy. The healthy family still needs to separate because they get frustrated. But when they get re-regulated, they'll come back together and try to figure out how they don't let it happen that way another time. And so I always say, I hate to tell schools this, but we built the American school system as a dysfunctional family model. Teacher and a kid get into it, we separate them generally for a time frame. And when we think it's enough time, we push them back together and say, well, this ought to be healthy now. And so responsibility-centered discipline always knew that we have to turn that into a more healthy model where kids are learning how to work through conflicts. Our teachers have to become the highly skilled at it so they can model and coach until the kids acquire the skills. And so when kids have the skills you put on your wall, because you start building them from the ground up, and they can do those things, of course it adds to achievement. I had one of the first high schools to hit 100% proficient in reading, went from 83 to 100. Well, we did that by perseverance being one of our traits, coaching it on a daily basis. And so putting things into application instead of just theory is my goal. See, I've always said we don't need more information, we need better implementation. We know things we need to do out there, but getting them done is hard, getting them implemented. So we built a framework where you can have 100 teachers highly skilled in a year and a half. Depending on how much you work at it, may be faster. And that's why we see it's most common for schools, if they have the leadership to do it, and this takes some leadership, we see their data, usually referrals drop by 40 to 60% in a year. Because now we're all highly skilled at coaching those moments, and it's consistent with our kids. And when they leave the classroom, we're always working on the skill of how could you learn to talk that through with your teacher? So they begin to acquire the skill to work through hard things. This is a picture of a team practicing. So the way that we can build this skill into everybody in a school is we start with these signs. So they're holding up those 5: support, expectation, breakdown, benefit, and closure. And that sign is up, and we're going to put you in a scene to try to practice coaching behavior. Now, we would let you write several of them first. We will bring it nice and slowly into your brain's format. But pretty soon you're going to have to go live with it. And so this is a school that I work with, and they're at one of their practice days. And practice becomes common for all of us. So they're throwing out a scene, teacher and a kid start, the signs are up, and the sign will go down when you do that piece. So when the lady hears support, she's going to put that sign down. You see the other guy holding expectation. He's waiting till he hears the expectation come out. That would be identifying what's on their wall. And so we begin to train or remap your brain that you can get to something when chaos comes. Somebody said, well, this is just kind of simple. I said, so is CPR. CPR, you can get certified in a day or half a day. But do you want to ride with the fire department after you get certified? Most of us don't, because doing it under stress and just learning what it is are two very different things. And so we want our teachers to get repetitions. Our schools that use this program, they practice this at least twice a month. Our teachers are getting confident stepping in And we are at a struggle at our nation that I've never seen with teachers. Our teachers are burning out faster than ever. And the number one reason, and we talk about this in the book, the number one reason they want out is classroom management. Behaviors continue to get harder and harder. And so think of it like a chain link for just a minute. If you can see my hands, if the chain is hooked together. Well, right now, our teachers are linked to our students. So if the student has a bad day, they pull the teacher to a bad day. We know this because when we interview teachers and we ask them, did you have a good day today or a bad day? They almost always base that upon student behavior. Well, if we're building a system where our teachers' days are based upon kids that can't regulate themselves very well yet, then we're having teachers with a lot of bad days. So we know, and I say this in kindness and love, if you've got a teeter-totter, one side is skill and one side is stress. As the skill goes up, the stress goes down. So what we want to do is give our teachers incredibly strong skill for those moments, so the stress goes down and their skill goes up. We know where a teacher's skill is and their stress is at when we interview with them after they send a student out of the classroom. If the entire conversation is focused on the student, then we know they have higher stress than skill. Here's how it sounds. This kid doesn't listen to anybody. I told you should change their schedule. She better not come back today. I'm done with her. All the focus is her. If a teacher has high skill, the conversation will be focused on the skill. It will sound like this. I really tried to help her. I offered her support. I told her we could do. She just kept coming at me and arguing. I even tried to use some time. I said, why don't we pause? I can get the class started. They're talking about what they did. Okay, I love teachers, and we have to help them drive that skill up so the stress isn't up. You could have a mastery moment when you send a kid out of your classroom. In a responsibility-centered school where we've trained teachers correctly, it is not uncommon for a kid to leave the classroom, the principal to do a quick measurement, how did it go? And they tell them what they did. They get a high five and they say, have a good day, man. She's struggling. We'll get her to work on it. We've got to get our teachers unhooked from the student. Otherwise, they're stuck every day with the kids pulling them of what kind of day they get to have. And so the last thing I'll kind of just tell you is a fun story that's in the book that you'll get to read if you have the book. And it was one of my coaches, I call him Coach Smith. He actually says I can use his name, but I feel like I should respect it because a lot of people know him. When I got there, he really didn't want to do this style of approach. He'd been in it a long time, and he said, I can do it. I've been able to run a class. But he got a kid that pushed back pretty hard. This is a junior in high school that would get pretty emotional, pretty physical. I mean, he would be threatening and really struggling. And so I would get to the door, and I did training with him just like all my other teachers. And it's funny because when I got to the door, I said, how'd it go when you tried to coach? I'll say the kid is Corey. I'll say, how'd it go when you tried to coach Corey? He says, what do you mean, how did it go? I said, well, when you used our coaching. He says, I didn't know we were actually going to do it. I said, well, yeah, we are. He says, well, we don't usually do things we do training on at this school. I said, well, this one we're going to do. I was the new principal. Well, he would keep sending him out every week. And when I would get to the door and ask him how it went, stress was all over him. All he could talk about as a kid. That kid is so disrespectful. He's never going to do anything in his life if he can't learn to respect. He would just. So I said, Coach, listen, you're going to be mad at me, but I already know you have high blood pressure. I already know you're not coaching anymore because of your heart. So why don't you let me coach you to get ready for him? So when the teams go to team time, you and I are going to practice coaching this kid. And the first practice is you get to be the kid and I'll be you. So you can cuss at me or do whatever. I want to show you how you can give them 5 in this situation. So we started practicing. He was kind of mad at me. He said, I have to do all this because he's a jerk. I said, well, he is right now, but he won't be for long if we do it right. So the teacher started working with me. I watched his skills start to change slightly, not boom, but just starting to change. I got there once. I said, how did it go? He goes, well, I gave him a benefit. I did give him a benefit. I told him. I said, hey, that's a starting spot. We're getting there. It'll get easier and easier. Next time he got a couple more in. I said, you see, Coach, see how it's starting to get. But coach started to stop talking about him and started to talk about what he was doing. And then finally, the kid came out of the class. I said, Coach, how did it go? He goes, Larry, I did so good. I said, do you see how you're not hooked to him anymore? You're proud of yourself. He still did all the same wild stuff. But I said, now you're going to let me close the exits. So I could take coach's story back to the kid. See, this mistake we've been making as principals is we try to get the kid to do it for us. We give them a pep talk in the office. We do all that. Now we're going to use the teacher's words to show them their error. So I could say, Corey, when coach was he respectful to you? Kid had to say, yeah. I said, did you know what you did wrong? Because it's in the 5. Yeah. Do you see why it's important, the benefit? I guess he talked about that. All of a sudden, when he's rational brain again, I'm showing him the error was his, not coach's. And then he doesn't go back to that class till he has a way of allowing coach to help him next time. Well, to make the long story short, the kid improved a lot. He only had 2 more referrals in high school. And coach came to see me. I wrote his story and he told me this. He goes, you know, Larry, when graduation ended, those kids all threw their caps up in the air. And he goes, you didn't get to see this, but would you add it to the story for the book? That kid was down on the floor of the gym looking all around till he made eye contact with me. And he ran up in the bleachers and wanted to hand me an invite to his graduation. Said, Coach, I wanted you to come by my house today if you have time. I just wanted to tell you thanks for not giving up on me. Coach was so proud of himself. Coach was always that person, but he didn't have the tools and his stress took over. Now his stress was higher than his skill and he was changing the kids. And so I got to wrap up and take some questions. So I'll let Melissa help me kind of with this last part and give out a book. But there's lots of videos you can see of responsibility, center discipline, and lots of ways to gather more information.
Okay, we do already have one question in the chat, Larry, from Teresita. How would you handle a student who is diagnosed with ODD and everyone makes excuses for them without real behavior changes? ODD, I think oppositional defiance disorder.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because being a former special ed teacher, you know, we had all of the different diagnoses often on an IEP, and I want to be respectful, and we've got to use best practices that are 4 different diagnoses and things that we learn about that. But we also know that kids have to continue to improve also. So what I heard in that question is the feeling of a little bit of overspotting maybe, or a kid can be manipulative at times. I've even had kids say to me, you can't make me do that. I have an IEP. I was like, wait a minute, you still got to get stronger at our school. So what I would say is, and this is in the book, I will have it do it real quick here, but there's a part of our brain, if we don't have an algorithm or the mapping to do something, then it has to fall into what's called a heuristic, which means I have to find my own novel and creative way to do something that's easier for other people. And I had a young lady, her name is in the book, you can read it in the book, that was diagnosed oppositional defiant, and she could take over the school. She was the toughest kid in our school. And they gave up on her. And I even had psychiatrists tell me, I don't think this kid can get better. I don't think that your stuff's going to work for her. And I said, well, just try to support us as best you can. And I watched her change. I get emotional when I talk about certain kids that were very part of my learning story, but she 6 months later was on our student council. Now, it started by when you feel those feelings, what could you do that wouldn't hurt anybody? Because she was physical. So the first thing, we got it to stop being physical. The second thing is she could just get to a space away from everybody and be left alone that didn't break property, that didn't hurt people. I mean, this went over months. And then it started to be, now that you can get to this place in the building, do you think you're strong enough to make it a place in the classroom? Probably. Okay, because I don't know how those feelings hit you. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know what my anger hits me. I got to do something. And we watched her grow to where she could go to a space in the classroom. Now, none of this was quick and easy. I mean, we went through lots of bumps in the road to get there. But I was so proud of that kid, you know, because she fought a hard fight. We're all going to get hard things in our life. I tell kids, ADHD is another one. You just got to figure out how you learn in ways you don't disrupt others. But I've had kids with ADHD that their solution they come up with, they have 2 desks. They go back and forth to their desks all day, but they don't disrupt anybody's learning. They work for a while, then they move back. But I didn't tell them the desk. They thought it up and created it. It's their own heuristic, their own novel way to do it. So they get the power of solving it. So I just believe we spot them where they're at, but I hear a little bit of a fear of some overspotting going on, and those have to be talked about as a staff because overspotting keeps the kid right where they're at.
Thank you, Larry. There's a lot of questions coming in the chat, lots of conversation happening. We've gotten a couple about adapting the framework for different age groups. So one attendee asked about adaptations for elementary school. Another said, are there examples of how you'd use this with a 7th grader versus a 12th grader? So
sure.
You knew this question was
my
coming.
wife is, definitely the better part of the family. My wife, Angela, has over 20 years of teaching kindergarten. So when all of this was formatting in my brain and I was beginning to reform schools, she was constantly morphing it into 4 and 5-year-old thinkers. You can't be as wordy. The skills on the wall might just be 2. But here's a teacher with little ones putting the brain into autonomy or the mastery state. With a 5-year-old, you say this: we're going to go to the library and you don't need to touch each other. Nobody wants to be touched, so keep your hands and feet to yourself. We've already practiced this. If you can't walk like a 5-year-old, keep your hands and feet to yourself, then you can practice at recess. Well, you're just going to ignite that autonomy fight in a whole bunch of 5-year-olds. And while you're not looking, they're going to touch somebody just to show you that they can. Or they're going to stop in the line so somebody bumps in and say, you're touching me. The whole thing you got activated was, you don't have control of me. You can't make me not touch people. And so here's a teacher that's learned this, and they flip it around. Class, we're going to go to the library, and one of our goals on our wall is to be respectful to each other. And part of being respectful is to let everybody have their own little space. And the tiles in the hallway are about a square. So if everybody kind of got their own square, we would all be respectful to each other. And so we're going to try to do that on the way down today. Now, I'll have you rate yourselves 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is saying, Mr. Thompson, that's too hard for me. Number 2 is saying, I could do it, but I'll probably need a reminder. 3 is like, I could do it by myself. 4 is, I could probably help others if they forget. Think of what level you are before we go. And would the 3s and 4s line up first, please? And I'm going to walk with the ones that might need a little coaching. Well, I've done it a couple hundred times and they all line up. And they all go down the hallway going, look how good I'm doing. I'm doing it. So we're not giving them a prize for it. It's the state of, look what I can do. That's where you want the brain operating. And we always show teachers how you always don't fight that autonomy fight. Put the brain into a mastery place where it gets to accomplish something. Even when we use behavior, we won't tell a kid how to do it. Too many times as teachers, we're coaching them from our algorithms, and that's not going to help a brain that doesn't have the same brain we have.
Larry, is there resources in the book that speak directly to working with kids who are neurodivergent?
There are not as many in there as I would like, as we had to just limit some things. But what I would say is somebody that has proper training in those areas could take the framework. I believe they could read the framework and then put in the supports that a kid's going to need with some of those different challenges. Because we my alternative school where I did this, over 60% of the kids were on an IEP. So we had, so many different challenges coming at us, but the spotting had to shift to what they would need in the situation without over spotting it.
Let me see. I'm going through some of these other questions. Somebody was wondering about the SOAR chart in your presentation. Is that something we can share?
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
That's a school I'll give them a shout out. Aberdeen, South Dakota High School is one of our schools. And I used real ones that schools created in the book. So you could just see the differences from place to place of how they wanted to build foundations. Yeah, that's their schools. They were very proud of it. When I got there to do training, they'd already had that built, and that's what framework they were going to use to build skills into kids and how they talk to them. That's a high school, so it's worded a little more like the language of an older student. But one of the other ones in the book is written more for like a K-8 building, so it goes all the way down to kindergarten.
Thank you so much. We are out of time. So thank you all for joining and taking the time, and we will see you all next season, I hope.
All right. Thank you, everybody.